Hello, precious human being. Welcome back to the Ryan Magic Show. In this episode, I'm going to be covering a very interesting topic, which is motivation versus contentment. Usually two very opposing approaches to life. One says where I am is okay, and I'm just going to accept who I am. And the other says, I'm not cool being here. I want to change it, and I've got the motivation to go after something new. And the whole point of this episode is going to be supporting you to learn how you can feel full while retaining a sense of drive and ambition in life. Very challenging. And I've certainly gone through the stages of being ridiculously motivated, then feeling really content, but losing all my motivation, and then refinding a way of being ambitious while also feeling whole where I am. That's what I'm going to be discussing in this episode. Now, before we jump in, I will admittedly say that this is the first solo episode I've done in a few weeks. A couple of weeks ago, I ran a 5-day retreat. And then last week, I ran a 3-day workshop. I ran the Art of Courage, which is my signature program. And I'm going to tell you about it quickly before we get into this episode, because if you're tuning into this podcast and you're anywhere around the world but haven't done this 3-day experience, it will, for someone that's looking for integration, it has the capacity to drastically improve the quality of your life. Now, I've been in personal development for 15 years, and I've gone really deep into the healing, trauma work, somatic release work, inner child work, therapy, plant medicine, all these different ways of healing my emotional body and my relationship to love and my capacity to regulate myself, looking at nervous system work. That's one camp, and it's beautiful. But then you have a whole other way of approaching and seeing life, which is spirituality, meditation, Hinduism, the Vedic tradition, the Mayan tradition, which is South American, where ayahuasca came from, the rainbow light lineage. And then you've got Buddhism, you've got mainstream religion, you've got spirituality from like a quantum manifestation, new age, I would say, quantum spirituality. You got people like Greg Braden, you've got people like Dr. John D. Martini, Joe Dispenza. You got that whole view of things. And then there is just straight out personal development, success, purpose, service, abundance, motivation, etc. And there is so much beauty within all three of those areas. If we just go physical reality, emotional reality, and spiritual reality. And I really struggle to integrate them all because they're very contradictory. I look at an Eckhart Tolle quote, and then I see a motivational video by who's someone super motivating, David Goggins, and they're directly contradicting each other. One saying you're sweet, one saying you're not. And they both feel like they've got something important to share. And so I've spent the last 15 years in personal development, most of which struggling to get the juice out of all of it. And what I teach in the Art of Courage is I facilitate a set of experiences and then share a small group of frameworks and models that teach a simple approach to life that integrates all of the beauty of this into a very simple way of living that is all set around being fulfilled. It is a beautiful experience. I'm really grateful to say that this is my life's work because there's so much beauty in it and it's very meaningful to teach. And it has the chance to change your life if you're also looking for a way to integrate all that and just get things to click, feel super full not full in yourself, not full of yourself, full in yourself, and then really go after what you want in life. That's the opportunity. Head to ryanmagic.com if you want to find out more about that, or you can message me on Instagram @TheRyanMagic, or you can just straight email me ryan@ryanmagic.com. And I'd love to connect and see if it's aligned for you. Moving into today's episode, I'm really excited to talk about this because there's so much power. Everything that I share in this podcast flows into the way that I teach life to work. And the way that I see life working is really easily grouped into two macro categories of consciousness. We can either be in our head or we can be in our heart. The head is really survival brain. It's our amygdala. It interacts with our intellect, the way that our brain compartmentalizes things, groups things, and the subconscious programming, subconscious mind, with also our nervous system that regulates whether we are in a state of regulation or whether we're dysregulated and we're in more of a fight or flight response, sympathetic nervous system response. That's survival brain. That's fear brain. Its purpose is to keep us alive, but it's very contradictory usually in its intentions, which is really based around the incessant need to stay alive versus the heart that desires liberation, freedom, fulfillment. It believes that that's going to be obtained and experienced through growth and through love. And so you have those two maps of consciousness. This is a pre-frame for understanding motivation and contentment. I just want to lay the foundation, if you haven't heard me talk about it before, that we literally can be in one of two minds. And that's why we say I'm in two minds often when it comes to making decisions, because we have our head that's considering what's going to keep me alive, and we have our heart that's like, I want to go into the unknown. The head wants to stay in the familiar. The heart wants to go into the unfamiliar. They've got competing intentions usually. And so whenever I meet someone and they're stuck, it's always because they're in their head. It's always because they're in survival consciousness. And so that's a little bit of a pre-frame. Now, if we just touch on the topic and introduce the topic today a little bit more thoroughly, we have really a benefit of the world of spirituality, which is contentment. You look at Buddhism and it's about renouncing all the physical world things and so we can just feel full with where we are, right? Similar with Taoism, similar with the lots of philosophers over time, but also the Vedic tradition, Buddhism, Taoism. A lot of that's just about contentment. People like Eckhart Tolle talk about just embracing the now. That's a beautiful, beautiful philosophy, and I've certainly received so much from that, right? But that's contentment. There's also on the other side of the spectrum, success and drive and ambition and going after it. And if I just share a little bit about my journey, I started off really struggling with massive anxiety in my teenage years. I grew up a very nervous and shy person, being born into a drug abusive and really mentally unwell household with two suicidal parents. And my self-esteem and my nervous system were very sensitive. And so I was always a bit of a follower, and I had a chip on my shoulder. I wanted to do something about that when I left high school. Slowly built up enough confidence to go after it. And I was like, I'm going to make it. I'm going to prove myself. And I really went after success. I had a lot of motivation. And I ended up a few years later building a multi-million-dollar business that was in the coaching space. So I first obtained a lot of success, but I didn't have contentment at all. I was very discontent. And the people that I was learning from and some of my mentors were all about being discontent, all about leveraging, never feeling okay about where you are and never settling. You want to get to your end of your life and you want to know you've given every last breath. And so contentment or self-acceptance, feeling peaceful about where you are and where I was the enemy of greatness, as the way I had it framed to me. And so it was very much just about more success, more success, more success. But after a certain point, I realized that all of that drive was built in deep toxic shame. That is a psychological term that essentially suggests if someone grows up and they're not given a lot of self-worth through their childhood, they can form a belief that they are inherently less than human as a baseline. And that was me. I felt deeply insecure and shameful for who I was, an identity of shame. Then with that shame identity, the only way to escape the pain of feeling like I was less than human was to attempt to be superhuman. And that's what happens with toxic shame. There's no every human's equal, and I just feel that I am love myself for who I am. I'm not enough, and the only way I can be enough is by being more than everyone else. And that was really what drove me. Fear, self-doubt, insecurity. And did it give me motivation? You better believe it did. I worked 100 hours a week on average, give or take, for 7 years straight. And I built an empire. But it was built in fear. And when I realized that, I shut my business down. It took me, and it wasn't instantaneous. There was a opening up to the idea. And then after, I think it was like a 6 to 12 month process, I realized that my following, my business was based in vanity, which was based in deep insecurity. And I realized that if I really wanted to develop deep self-worth, I was going to have to learn to love myself without that identity of being a somebody, this young, successful entrepreneur, this big business. I was going to have to figure out in a way or learn to feel whole without all of that, all the conditions that were making me feel temporarily good about myself. So I did that. I got into meditation. Meditation is what led me to that realization. And I kept going down that spiritual path. I did a lot of different inner healing work and a lot of plant medicine, a lot of exploring the pain of not feeling enough as a child. And through the spiritual endeavor, I learned to feel content in a moment, content in the present moment, feeling whole in the now. And I could meditate and feel beautiful, whole, perfect, and complete in that moment. But it still wasn't integrated, because what happened is that motivation that was there massively when I was building this big empire from insecurity, when I got into spirituality and I felt content in a moment, all of the motivation that was there during the building of that empire left. It literally went, because no longer was I feeling afraid. I was feeling okay in who I was. So I didn't have to prove myself as much. And so the motivation, which was fear, left. Now, let's just pause for a second in this podcast episode. So this is why I started by pre-framing head consciousness and heart consciousness, fear consciousness and fulfillment consciousness. This is the key to embracing motivation with fullness. Understanding that 99% of people in this world create motivation by feeling afraid that if they don't get better, if they don't do better, they're not going to be enough. And if they're not enough, they're not going to be loved. We can see this in the culture that celebrates economy. It celebrates performance. It starts in the home. It then moves into school, where you get graded academically, graded musically, graded performatively if you're doing drama, and graded with sports. So right from an early age, young sponges we are as kids take on the feedback that if I want to be loved, I'm going to have to be good at stuff, right? So we form this association that we better be good in order to be loved. We better succeed in order to be loved. And that's what the whole economy is based off. And it's a pretty big blind spot until it's seen. And then once it's pointed out, it's very obvious. But it's very difficult to initially see. that we fall into this hypnotic pattern. So many powerful thought leaders around the world have coined different terms to describe this pattern that I'm talking about, that I'm about to introduce. I call it head hypnosis. And this is when we're driven by fear and it's motivating our decision making. It's a state that we fall into of being in the head. Remember, there's head and heart. And it's a state of being in the head, but not even realizing that we're driven by fear. So the entire time that I was growing my business, I was incredibly motivated, but I was massively in head hypnosis. I was massively driven by fear, and I was being controlled by the head, essentially, which had a big belief in there. You have to be successful. You're not worthy of love. So I was constantly dysregulated. I was constantly feeling stressed, busy, overworked, driving, working hard, celebrated by the outside world, but feeling deeply disconnected from myself and deeply insecure most of the time, with little glimpses of arrogance. And this head hypnosis, there are amazing thought leaders that call it other things. You have Tara Brach, who's the author of Radical Compassion, Radical Kindness, Radical Acceptance, Radical Compassion and Radical Acceptance. And has been around for a long time teaching Buddhist wisdom, psychological wisdom that's really easy to understand. And she calls it trance, falling into trance. You've just gone into this trance-like state. And then you look at the movie The Matrix, it's called The Matrix, being in the Matrix. Certain people call it being an NPC, a non-player character. If you're playing a video game and you're the player in the video game, all the other characters in the video game, if it's not a live streaming where you're versing other humans, all the other video game characters are non-player characters. They're coded to respond in certain ways. They don't have free will. They don't have awareness. So they're NPCs. And a lot of human beings in this trance-like robotic state are kind of acting like an NPC. And that's what happens when we get in fear consciousness. We don't have awareness. Napoleon Hill called it drifting. You drift off to this other state. You don't have awareness. You're just reacting and responding in the monotony of the 9-to-5 grind, ticking boxes, doing what you're told, powered by a set of subconscious programs without having the ability to intervene with awareness and therefore have free will to make decisions in one's life. And we can see this in an exaggerated form if you ever get in an intense argument, because it's fear consciousness that grips us and takes hold of us in this drifting, this trance-like state, this head hypnosis. Eckhart Tolle also refers to it as being in a hypnosis as well. When we fall into this state, we're in fear consciousness, which means we're scared. We're actually scared. And so the mind takes over and it hijacks and it just does what it perceives is required for safety. And we can see this very obviously if we get in an argument. If you've ever been in an argument, which I take it you have, in a relationship, and you've been arguing for an hour, 30 minutes, you forget what you're even arguing about. And then you take some space and you settle down and some awareness comes back in. What happened for that 45-minute period when you were arguing? You had no conscious awareness. You were still doing things, saying things you didn't mean, things you didn't even choose to say. It just came out involuntarily. Why? Because you're in head hypnosis. Your fear consciousness was running the show. And most people's fear consciousness is making the big decisions of people's lives. So how's this relevant to contentment versus motivation? Well, if we look at my drive, my motivation that came from the building of my empire, my little empire, my multi-million-dollar coaching business and whatnot, it was driven when I was in a trance-like state. So I was very, very fearful the whole time. I would never admit to being fearful. If I said to someone who's like, really angry and clearly in head hypnosis and not having any free will, if I said to that person, hey, you scared, they're going to get aggressive and angry. They are scared. That's what's powering all their behavior, but they will never have enough awareness to even want to admit it. They just defend. And so most of the time when someone is finding themselves in society with motivation, that motivation's origin is fear. They're motivated because they feel that their life depends on it. Why? Because we're all motivated to get along with other people. We're all programmed to live in tribes. So our whole second layer of our brain, we have the 3 layers of the brain. The oldest part is the amygdala. That's the animal part. That's the fear consciousness that I'm talking about with the head. And then we have the limbic brain, which is a sophisticated layer that teaches us how to socialize and interact with other humans. And all mammals have a limbic brain because all mammals require other animals for their survival of the same species. So they all are programmed in certain ways to interact with other animals of the same species. We have this limbic brain as well. So we're essentially programmed to say that you need to get along with the tribe, because if you can't get along with the tribe and if they don't like you and you get judged, God forbid rejected, God forbid abandoned, you might die in the wild, right? So we have the amygdala and the limbic brain that both kind of fuel our behavior in a way that's going to have us be okay, get along with the tribe, and stay alive. And so if you grew up with parents that said, you got to get good grades, a school that said you should be good at sport, and it's that performance culture, as young people, our brain is designed to learn what we need to be and how we need to act to get along with the tribe so that the tribe, so there's that cohesion with the tribe, and they keep us around so that we can survive with those numbers. We're designed that way. And so we're programmed to say, you need to do what your parents said. You need to be who they expect you to be. You need to be who society expects you to be. And that imprinting in our early life tells us you need to succeed to be worthy of love. And so, of course, we're going to be motivated on some level to make money. Of course, we're going to be motivated on some level to perform. And most of us have that programming in us. So most people have a motivation to succeed, not just because they need the money to survive, because having a Mercedes is not going to give you any more logical chance of survival than having a Hyundai. But people spend $30, $40, $50, $100,000 more on a car that could do the exact same thing purely for status, for social status, purely to be liked more by other people, because they're scared of not being liked, because if they're not liked, they might not be protected. They might be abandoned by the tribe. And so fear motivates a lot of behavior in society. Okay? And this is a lot of pre-framing here, but it's important. It's important to really get this. So motivation in society, to summarize this part of the podcast, is pretty much generated by fear. Fear of not being good enough, fear of not being successful enough, fear of not being loved, fear of being alone, fear of not being accepted, being abandoned. And that's what motivates most people's actions. So that obviously doesn't lead to fulfillment. That keeps us in that hypnotic head hypnosis, that trance, that NPC mode. Even if someone seems like they've got a lot of action happening and they're doing a lot of things and they're their own boss. I was my own boss, but I was an NPC because I was driven by the subconscious programming that said, Daddy's not going to love you unless you're successful, because my dad was very strict on me. I attributed success, performance equals love, not performance equals I might be abandoned by my dad and my mom and die in the wild. That's what my subconscious programming tells me. So of course I was going to be motivated, because if I don't do better, I'm going to die. Mom and dad's not going to love me. Society's not going to love me. A woman will never love me if I'm not successful. And that was my set of belief systems. Now, powered by that, I didn't have free will. It was a need to be successful. I had to be successful. And if I wasn't, like I mentioned about the toxic shame, I was less than human. And if I'm less than human, no one's going to love me and I'm going to die alone in the wild. That's not free will. That's not, look at Ryan, he's this successful. Whoa, look at what he's created. I was an NPC. I didn't even have free will. I was just purely powered by fear. That's motivation. That's motivation. That's a problem. That's why motivation and contentment are very difficult to put together. Because if someone's motivated by fear of not being good enough, the moment that they feel good enough, the motivation goes. The moment they don't feel good enough, that they do feel good enough, they feel whole for the first time in their lives, the motivation goes. And that's exactly what happened to me. I learned to love myself more for who I was, still have conditioning and trauma and insecurities. So it wasn't like I clocked the game, but I exposed the fear consciousness and I started to love myself more unconditionally. And the moment I did, all the energy that I had before, because it was life or death, whether this business worked for me, either I'm going to be loved and safe or I'm going to be nothing and die. Of course, I'm going to rise to the occasion because I have to. And people that don't rise to the occasion, me included, will have very low mental health, suicidal tendencies because it's such a unstabilizing, difficult feeling to embody. And I've been there too. So what have we established so far? We've established that that most people that find motivation do so by fear. And the moment that they find contentment, they lose the motivation. And I'm going to introduce a solution in this episode, but it's very important to understand that if you want to live a fulfilling life means living in the heart, not the head. The head will give you motivation. And you may tick some attachments that you have in your mind. You might succeed and hit some milestones when you have those attachments. But you're going to be dysregulated the entire time because you're powered by fear consciousness, which means that you're scared that you're not going to meet these attachments the whole time. And you're going to be in a bit of a trance-like state, not present to enjoy your life. But you might meet some of the attachments. I'm essentially just narrating my experience. I wasn't present for the experience. When I ran my big successful empire, I was doing some cool things as well. Some really amazing things. Had this huge team, huge for a normal, compared to the average coach. We had 25 full-time staff. We had these really cool culture. We had pajama Tuesday, onesie Wednesday, suit up Fridays. We'd do gratitude circles, learning experiences together. It was cool. I had 250 clients in my $20,000 program, which I would run all these cool international retreats where people would come along. I ran one in Hawaii, in Vegas, in Monte Carlo, in Switzerland, Thailand, Bali. I had these such cool experiences. And when I was having the experiences, I was just in my head afraid that I wasn't growing quickly enough. I was in head hypnosis. So I wasn't there to be present to soak it in. Like legitimately, I'm confessing, I didn't enjoy those experiences. I felt some temporary relief when I hit the exorbitant expectations that I had. Temporary relief that was then just replaced with an instant thought of, cool, what's next? And there wasn't fulfillment in that experience. There was fake temporary happiness of, oh my gosh, I'm better than people. Oh my gosh, no, there's actually people better than me. I'm still not going to be loved. Because remember, toxic shame is inherently feeling worse than others. And the only escape is to do better than others, to feel better than others. And that was essentially what I was constantly trying to do. So I had motivation. You can have motivation if you're in fear. Yeah. If I said, you're going to die if you don't make $1 million in 3 months, you're going to be pretty motivated, right? It's pretty simple. Motivation is created from fear. So how do we have that pull and drive to go after something meaningful when instead of being driven by being not enough, we're actually feeling content, because that's what contentment is. And that's what I experienced on my next chapter. Learned to meditate and feel whole in a moment, build some of that unconditional love and let go of some of those conditional love conditions. But then the motivation completely left. And what I found myself doing for 5+ years after I shut down that business that was driven by fear is I would get contentment for a while, and then I'd be confused about how to move forward because I wasn't established in wholeness yet. And so I would try to do something that's success driven and go straight back into that fear consciousness again, and then be like, what the hell? I'm feeling dysregulated. I'm not enjoying the moment. And then I would let it go and go back into wholeness and contentment without the motivation. And then I'd just swing back into motivation from fear, try to start a new project, wouldn't feel sustainable, didn't feel aligned or right. And then I would just drop it again. And I kept pendulating between motivation, but discontentment, and then feeling whole with contentment. Motivation, discontentment, feeling whole, contentment. And I didn't understand how to build motivation while feeling full. And that's essentially what I'm going to talk about how to do in this podcast. We're getting there. We're getting there. I like to be thorough and I like things to actually land. So I'm going to continue to do that. So the feeling of contentment is a very powerful and rare experience in this modern world. Just social media and emotionally eating, Netflix, a lot of cigarettes, drinking, a lot of these modern short-term gratification habits, they're all symptoms of head hypnosis. They're all ways to sedate, to plug our free will and keep us in this stress cycle so that the head, the fear consciousness, can stay in control, because we don't have that spaciousness to see what's actually happening. As soon as we get spaciousness and awareness, we've got free will. We might choose something different, but our head wants to stay in the driver's seat and decide the way that we're going to go. And so all of this whole society that's just riddled with short-term gratification, addiction, and essentially stress, that's all promoting more fear. And so it's very rare for someone to actually get to a place where they can see what's happening and liberate themselves through that to feel content. That's a rare phenomenon. And that's what I was able to experience. But I felt so different and so disintegrated with society and my goals and my dreams and service and being relevant. It was like, okay, the whole world's powered by motivation and addiction and fear and stress. I'm now feeling full and I don't feel like I belong anymore. And I'm not sure how to do both. How do I do this? But I just want to honor and celebrate if you felt a sense of contentment before. That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing because it takes a lot of courage to let go and surrender. There's this beautiful quote that says, flow happens at the junction point between discipline and surrender. And that discipline part, it's usually motivated by fear with most people in society. As I've said, that surrender piece, meditation, letting go, being okay to accept yourself for where you are, my gosh, is that a courageous thing to do? Courage means heart. In Latin, it literally means heart. Courage comes from the Latin root word core, and core means heart. So courage means being in the heart. To be courageous is to be in the heart. It is convenient and comfortable to stay in the head, to continue to sit in a monotonous grind. If you've got an addiction to alcohol and a dependency on that, yeah, it's comfortable to keep using that dependency strategy. It's not really comfortable because you feel stressed and dysregulated, but it's familiar, and it's far more uncomfortable to ditch the short-term gratification, ditch that motivation, fear-driven loop, which I did by shutting down my business, and which a lot of people do by saying, I'm willing to face the pain, and learn to love myself without all that dependency. That's contentment. That's acceptance. That's finding wholeness. And that is heart. It takes courage. It is heart. It is fulfillment. But it's not integrated as an initial step. So let's just leave those two pieces there. We have motivation from fear and we have contentment from fullness, but we haven't found how to do both. Let's bring in the strategy now. The answer is inspiration. Inspiration is feeling the pull to action, the call to action, but not from a place of fear. Inspiration is feeling the pull to action from a place of love, from a place of fullness and wholeness. And that is the answer. That is the answer. And I'm going to give you a potent strategy to implement this. It's something that I created. That's a bit arrogant. It was given to me from God. Thank you, God. Thank you so much. But this whole perspective of head and heart was something that organically came to me through this random set of breadcrumbs, and an activity that I do most days called a heart map. A heart map. And that is understanding that we have a head consciousness that we can be in. When we're in head consciousness, we're feeling afraid, we're feeling activated, even if it's a thin film of stress. You might be feeling like, yeah, everything's going really well, but your intellect is dictating your decision making and keeping you comfortable, which is origin is in fear. So when we're in fear consciousness, we're not fulfilled and we're in our head. So we can be in that fear consciousness, that survival brain, the amygdala, or we can be in the heart consciousness, which is liberation, freedom, fulfillment, which is actually the prefrontal cortex. That's where our mind opens up. We have critical thinking, imagination, intuition. The prefrontal cortex lights up when those faculties of our brain are in use. And so that's what it looks like to be in the heart from a brain perspective. So we can be in fear consciousness or we can be in fulfillment consciousness. Now, I'm here to suggest that you can feel a pull to action, not the same as motivation, because I'm just labeling motivation as fear consciousness. So you can emulate a pull towards action by being in the heart, and that's called inspiration. And this is what it looks like. Every single time, every single goal you have, every single time you're feeling a pull to do something. Let's say, for example, because I'm going to use motivation as, you know what, I'm going to give two examples. I may forget to circle back to the second one, but let's see how we go. The first one's just going to be business. Okay? The first one's just going to be business. So let's say the goal is a successful business. Within that goal and every action and every moment of your life, your fear consciousness is going to have a series of attachments and fears to do with that goal, situation, or moment. And your heart is going to have a set of desires and things that it desires to experience from that exact moment or that goal. And inspiration comes from feeding the heart's desires and not by being fueled by your head's attachments. So to nail that really simply, you can either have head attachments or you can have heart desires. One of those two. You can either have head attachments or heart desires. When we're in a goal, both simultaneously exist. So you're going to be powered by one or the other in a moment. So let's look at business success as the goal. You want to have a successful business? Let's look at some potential head attachments. All head attachments are originated in fear. So if you want to be successful in business, one of the head attachments might be, these are things that you really care about, to get you stressed, to get you worried, to activate that survival brain. So a head attachment could be, I'm attached to not looking like a loser and not having my business fail. I'm attached to being liked. I'm attached to getting rich so I can prove everyone right or wrong. I'm attached to sounding smart. I'm attached to having a really good idea that everyone loves. I'm attached to having branding that people think super cool. Yeah. These are just some examples. It's all based around vanity and fear. And so if I just use myself just really quickly for while I'm on this podcast, some of my head attachments while I'm here right now speaking to you is sounding smart, looking good, because I do this in video as well. I want you to look at me and think, yeah, he looks cool. He looks good looking. He looks healthy. I have the head attachment of you guys liking me. I've got the head attachment of you liking me more than other podcasts, because I have that toxic shame of feeling like I need to be superhuman and better than everyone to be loved. I've got the head attachment of getting people actually from this podcast to do my workshop so that I feel like I'm doing a good job with that, and that you guys look at me and anyone in the space that knows who I am thinks, no, Ryan is doing a good job. He is successful. These are all my head attachments. It's all based in fear of being rejected, fear of not being liked, and fear of ultimately being abandoned and alone. It's not all to do with likability and other people. Some other head attachments could be, I'm scared of going broke. I'm scared of running out of money and not having money for food and shelter. I'm attached to doing things really easily. AKA, I'm scared of hardship. I'm scared of challenge. I'm scared of doing new things. Yeah. So head attachments are anything that has a fear attached to it, right? There's some examples, but with the same goal, okay, I'll give examples for me on this podcast and also the example of someone having a successful business. There are heart desires. They're not attachments, because they don't need to be there for someone to feel safe. Like attachments are like, this has to happen or I'm a goner. I'm screwed. And it causes a lot of stress because it's activating survival brain. Heart desires are not, I need it, because it's the presupposition is I'm already whole. The heart is tapping into the creative intelligence and the source of creation of the whole universe. It's an energy that we exist within, but within our consciousness, we can tap into that energy and feel a sense of absolute completeness and fullness and infinite love, timeless love that's within us. So that's what our heart is. Our heart is a portal of isness, or the absolute, or the divine, or the quantum, as Joe Dispenza would call it, or God. There's lots of different ways that it's referred to. So our heart's desires are not attachments, but they are things that are wholesome and holy. They come from a place of wholeness. Whole, wholesome, and holy. So I'm going to give some examples for me on this podcast. So it's a lot more, I'm whole, and I'm actually just really inspired, not motivated, inspired to support people to live with fulfillment, to see, have awareness, to transcend their fear consciousness and live with free will, loving themselves, being in their own corner, knowing the truth of how powerful and beautiful they are. See, that's a genuine inspiration for me. And it's a genuine desire. And it makes it so easy to be on this podcast episode and talk about this stuff, because I'm here to support you to live your most fulfilled life. And that makes it very easy for me, because it's not fueling fear. If I tap into trying to sound smart and think about what I'm going to say, it's going to cause me to have a fear response and feel stress and not enjoy the experience, not be present. I'm going to be in trance, head hypnosis, MPC mode. I'm going to be drifting. So I can feed either or of those consciousnesses. So other heart desires of me being on here is to be of service using my voice, be in my genius zone. Me using my voice is my genius zone. I love doing this. It's to feel a connection to you, feel a connection to source, with the energy and the wisdom coming through source, through me, to you. It is to be present and enjoy the moment. And ultimately, I believe for every human being, all heart desires come back down to feeling a sense of fullness, aka fulfillment. So my top heart's desire is to be fulfilled. And when I tap into those heart desires, you see, if you're watching the video, that I've got a bit of a involuntary smile on my face, because it feels really nice to tap into those areas. If I default back to fear consciousness, which is pretty powerful of an energy, that sucks me in. I've got to circumvent that by actually proactively doing this heart map. That's what this activity is. You can do it mentally in your head. What am I attached to here? What's my fear consciousness want? What am I actually desiring truly? What are the holy, wholesome drives here? Yeah. What's going to inspire me and pull me to act from a place of love? And that needs to be fed, fueled, driven, right? So that's a heart map. And if you can tap into enough of the truths of what you're really wanting from your business, you're going to feel pulled to act. But you're going to have to reveal and remember what they are. Because when we go to do something new, if you've got a goal like being in business, if you're lacking ambition because you've done inner work and you actually feel content with where you are, if you're lacking ambition, what's going to happen is fear consciousness is going to kick your butt initially. It's going to take control. Our fear consciousness is 2.5 times more powerful at grabbing our attention than heart consciousness. Yeah. The head's 2.5 times more influential in our state than our heart is. So we kind of have an uphill battle. It's kind of David and Goliath. And we need to practice doing heart maps and feeding the direction of following our heart. We got to learn and teach ourselves how to be inspired. Yeah. And so if we go back to the business example, you might be in it because you are really wanting to get creative and your job didn't allow you to be creative enough. So you want to do it because you're really excited to create. That's a heart desire. It's an authentic heart desire. You might want to get to work slightly less. Maybe initially that's not going to be a thing, but maybe that's why you're like, I'm sick of doing something I don't enjoy all the time, slaving away and feeling just like I resent getting up on Monday morning. I want to be present and enjoy what I'm doing. Maybe that's a heart desire, being enjoy, being present. Maybe you want to serve people. You want to make a difference. You want to shake it up. You want to be creative. These are heart desires. Service is a heart desire, and ultimately being fulfilled. And maybe you're doing it because you really want to create more abundance and you're struggling to get paid enough in your work, and you're like, no, my family deserve more wholesomeness, more abundance. True abundance that's going to fuel fulfillment is a heart desire. So when you tap into all these factors, if you, just like a pros and cons list, you go in your journal and you just write heart map for my business, head attachments, and you get clear on what are all the head attachments. Heart desires is the second column, and you write all your true heart desires. They're the wholesome desires. It's easy to feed that. And I have this practice that you may or may not know about called the Heart's Prayer, and there are 4 heart truths in it. The first heart's truth is you deserve your truest desires. You don't deserve your head attachments. You don't deserve to feel motivated. Motivation is being in fear. It's being dysregulated. It's being in stress. It's feeling less than. You deserve so much more than that. You deserve to feel present, full, wholesome, holy. You deserve to be fulfilled. And that, in a sense of pulling you to action, is inspiration. And you get to create inspiration by feeding what's wholesome. I created a quote the other day that inspired me to do this episode. And what I said in the quote was, something along the lines of, you find integration between motivation and contentment by dreaming wholesomely. By dreaming wholesomely. And what that means is, when you're going after something that you're looking for motivation for, you find the wholesome reasons that you're doing it. And when you can tap into that, it will inspire you to move. It's just going to take some unlearning, because not just you, but 99.99% of the population is driven by fear. I hammered that point home. Because of the way that we're raised and what we value as a society is so performative, so based around needing to be successful to be liked, that we're taught, and our fear consciousness has grabbed onto it and said, you better do well. You better go after your and get a good job and do well at uni and get good grades. You better make a lot of money, because you're not going to be worthy of love if you don't. And of course, that's going to create some motivation. That's what inspires most young entrepreneurs. Yeah, most people get into it by going, I'm going to be so successful. I'm going to be like Dan Blazarian. I'm going to be like all these famous celebrities, and I'm going to be rich, and everyone's going to like me. My parents are going to be proud of me, and I'm going to be loved, and I'm going to be safe. That's ultimately what they're looking for. It's just a very ineffective strategy for getting that need met, because it's essentially delaying it for eternity. Whereas we can feel whole now, feel that contentment. That's like one of the big factors of this podcast. Can feel content, learn to feel whole in who we are right now as who we are. And we can create inspiration by tapping into an awareness of what is our fear. What are we scared of here? What are we attached to here? What's our head really wanting from this goal? And not feeding that. But by recognizing it, we can become aware of what's pulling us into pressure. And then we can choose to divert ourselves into our heart. And instead of being in pressure, we can create presence by tapping into the real heart truths, the real heart desires behind why you're pursuing that particular thing you're looking for motivation on. Because there are wholesome desires there. I know everyone has head attachments and heart desires for everything they do. Someone's in an argument with their partner and they're doing a heart map on that. They're attached to being right. They're attached to being in control. They're attached to being liked. They're attached to being safe, defending themselves. But then their heart's desires are, I just want you to see me. I just want to be loved. I just want to receive love. I just want to love you. I just want to feel safe. These are beautiful desires. And if you fed them and became aware of them during the argument, you can access them pretty easily with vulnerability. You can achieve presence through that vulnerability instead of the pressure that comes from the fear, the attachment. Yeah. If you're in health, I said I may forget this to circle back around, but I'm remembering. If we think about health and you're going to the gym, what are the head attachments? I want to hit PBs. I need to be doing a good job. I want to look a certain way so that people think I'm attractive. And then you walk out kind of shut off from the world into this kind of like inflated sense of self. They're the head attachments, but the heart desires, what are they? I want to feel present. I want to do something that gets my body moving. I want to feel vital. I want to feel energized. And I want to love myself. I want to feel loved. And I can feel loved by honoring myself. You could look in the mirror and do some kind of dance and look at yourself and just think, I'm so sexy. And you could get that true desire met. The head attachment, we never get it. We keep pushing it away because it's based in lack, and it's always going to be in lack because the head's going to continue to hypervigilantly search for evidence that's not met to try to keep you safe. So it's always going to be there. We're not going to get rid of the head. It's inherently trying to support us. It's just not very effective in a modern setting. And so it's always going to be there. We just have to feed the heart. We need to feed it because the head's so powerful. The head is so powerful. It's so all-consuming. And we're so triggered into it. We're so triggered into a stress response because the whole modern life presupposes and is normalized biting off more than you can chew for your own body's energy. Just living a normal life. People barely get grounded. If you work to a 9 to 5, the only way you can get grounded is by going to a park, taking your shoes off and putting your feet on the ground. 10,000 years ago, living in the wild, it was impossible not to be grounded. There was nowhere that was synthetic. Everything was grounding. What, you're in a rock? That's grounding. You're in a tree? That's grounding. You're on the earth? That's grounding. You're on the grass? That's grounding. You're in the water? That's grounding. The only way you can not be grounded 10,000 years ago is by jumping in the air. So people are inherently so much more revitalized and connected just inherently as living on the earth. If you look in a modern context, it's so difficult. We have synthetic light, right? We have synthetic light that shuts off the melatonin release and has us not get tired at night. And then we're exhausted and wake up with an alarm clock every morning and our body's already exhausted. Then it has to go be in a synthetic environment to work in a 9 to 5. That's not fulfilling. Way overworking, working under fluorescent lighting, and then getting exhausted and repeating the cycle and building this energetic debt, which is why we have a cancer epidemic, why we have so many health conditions in the world, because it's just unsustainable. And so the head is constantly, because our body's not even regulated and healthy enough to not be constantly going into a stress response, constantly in hypervigilance, constantly in fear consciousness. So it's an uphill battle, but we need to work against that if we want to be fulfilled. And doing a heart map, which is what the action step from this podcast is, will give you a way to combat that. It's not going to be the whole solution, but if you want to find inspiration, it's the answer. If you get pulled back into your head afterwards because you're living in a lifestyle that's not healthy enough to keep you in your heart, even if you do the heart map, but your capacity is very limited because you're not as healthy as you could be, you're going to get pulled straight back into fear consciousness very quickly. So the real answer here is being inspired through being connected to your heart regularly, so you find naturally and organically the pull to serve and the pull to grow, because you just love that, because you're feeling full. And it's like, now I'm in a place of fullness. Now I'm in a place to change. What's the challenge? What's next? I'm excited to grow. I'm excited to create. But in the short term, to shift from motivation to inspiration, excuse me, a heart map is the answer. Wow, that's a lot of talking. I've got a bit of a channeled motor mouth or flow mouth going on here. So anyway, on that note, I'm going to bring this to a close. Wholesome, feeling full and content is beautiful. When you get there, the process to transition from motivation to inspiration is to unlearn the feeling, the memory in the body of what motivation feels like. That's not what you're going to do moving forward. If you've connected to spirit, if you've connected to a sense of self-love and wholeness in who you are, you're going to have to unlearn motivation. You're going to have to learn inspiration. How can you do that? A heart map. Within whatever it is you're looking for some pull to action in, write down a column of head attachments, another column of heart desires, and connect to what's wholesome and true and what you really are inspired to act from. What are your heart's truest desires here? If you tap into that, it will pull you to act. You have to feed it. You have to train yourself and wire yourself to move from love. Yeah. Be kind to yourself with this. It's a whole new process. It's taken me 5+ years, and I'm only starting to build momentum with inspiration. Yeah. I spent 5 years wrestling back and forth between motivation and contentment. So yeah, that's it for this episode. I would love to hear if anything I shared touched you in any way. You can email me, ryan@ryanmagic.com. You can send me a message on Instagram. My handle is the Ryan Magic, THE, Ryan Magic. And I love hearing from you guys. And if you're looking for the next step, I'm scratching the very thin surface here of a beautiful body of wisdom that I spent 3 years creating and the last 2 years tinkering with, I'm going to say, to create this series of practices. The Hearts Map's an example of a practice, but I've got a series of them to support living a heart-fueled life, living a fulfilling life. And I would love to support you to integrate that at the Art of Courage workshop, 3-day experience. Find out more at ryanmagic.com. I love you guys. Thank you for tuning in. If you get value from this podcast and you haven't reviewed it, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. I love you guys, and I'll see you on the next episode. Peace out.